Hello, and welcome to another edition of Here We Are. I am your host, T.R. Mugabe. This time on our program, we're going to introduce to you some of the people who record for us images that we refer to as news every day. These portable eyes are out there roving, showing us who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. The videotape footage that these ENG crews shoot don't always appear on the daily broadcast as they would like for it to. When the minicam crews return to the studio, in most cases, they no longer have control over the footage that they have shot. The news producers, reporters, and the news editors are free to cut a tape however they see fit. This sometimes causes their emotions to get in the way. The minicam people go out and shoot their footage, and much of the footage that they shoot ends up edited out or erased. Our guest at this time will let us know some of the things that go on back at the news centers around this country. We have with us Randall Blakely. He is a graduate of Tennessee State University in Nashville, Tennessee. Blakely worked at WSMV-TV in Nashville to WIS-TV Channel 8 in Indianapolis, Indiana. He later joined WBBM-TV Channel 2 in Chicago, where he is now employed. Randall was in Tanzania, better known as South Africa, in February of 1990 when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. Randall is the proud owner of an Emmy. To go along with his Emmy, Randall was picked for the News Photographer of the Year award for the state of Illinois from the Associated Press, and he was recognized by Chicago Association of Black Journalists. Fred Talavera is a graduate of DeVry Technical School. He was a chief engineer at Loyola University in Chicago. Out of Loyola University, he went to WGN-TV, Channel 9, Chicago. Fred left Channel 9 and ended up at the Peacock station in Chicago, WMAQ-TV, Channel 5. Fred did minicam for WMAQ-TV, and he is one of those people who can cut you in or cut you out. My last guest is Mr. Dwayne Muhammad. Mr. Muhammad is a shooter for WMAQ-TV Channel 5 in Chicago. Mr. Muhammad has traveled the globe with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and for the Nation of Islam. He has traveled this country for WMAQ-TV and NBC. Welcome all of you to our show. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you.
My first question, and I'll start with you, Randall, and move down, is what was your major in school?
My major was broadcast journalism.
And yours, Fred, was?
I was a computer science major.
Computer science major, and you, Dwayne?
Broadcast journalism.
Did you feel that your educational background prepared you for what you're doing now? I mean, that would be a good question for you, Fred, because...
Well, basically, yes and no. It prepared me in terms of knowing the equipment, what it does, how it does, the things it's supposed to do. But in terms of the journalism aspect of what I do, I picked that up on a hands-on basis.
Hands-on type basis. Would you agree that a lot of what you learned as being ENG people was basically hands-on?
A lot of it is, as far as my journalism background is concerned, I picked up the majority of my journalism background from my studies in college, but you do learn, you do get hands-on experience, from doing the street work, the day-to-day work, and out on the street and in the editing booth.
Yeah, school is basically an introduction to the terminology, the language, as Freddie mentioned earlier, the equipment, but as far as the street sense, you have to pick that up from the experience. School is theory, but the job is the actuality of it. So school is more or less an introduction of it.
Okay. Well, how long have you been shooting the news for?
Well, I've been with MAQ for 10 years right now.
Okay, well, what I'm talking about from when you first started into television to now.
Well, my media experience really goes back to 1969. From 1969 to 1975, I worked at the Muhammad Speaks newspaper, and that was electronic media. I didn't get into, I'm sorry, it's print media. I didn't get into the electronic media until 1977, starting with Channel 44 and then over to Channel 5.
What about your experience when you started?
Well, I've done practically all the aspects of TV. I've been in television and radio since 1968. And I've pretty much you know, been around the country in terms of doing jobs in different countries, because the original theory was that you had to put in your time at small stations and eventually work your way up to a major station like here in Chicago.
Was being an electronic news gatherer your first career choice? Was that, I know you have to take certain steps to get to that point, but when you were in college, okay, when I get out, you know, my ultimate goal is to be an ENG crew person. Was that your first choice?
When I went to college, I went as a music major. As a matter of fact, I was on a music scholarship, and I had no idea that I was going to end up doing, you know, what I do now. I had a friend who was working radio in Nashville, and he told me just to come down to the studio and, you know, check him out on Saturdays, and I went and did that. And I started off doing a little radio and doing some print work like Mr. Muhammad, and through that little networking process, I met other people in television, in ENG, and I met a guy who introduced me to a news director at WSMV, and I in turn accepted an internship offer there, and ever since then I've been into it. And as a matter of fact, when I took the internship, or when I did the internship, I was interning to become a reporter, without even knowing that, you know, I had an eye for television photojournalism.
You can go ahead.
It's real funny because I wanted to be a disc jockey, and that's how I got into the business. I went to communication schools and was working as a DJ, and I always had a question in my mind, and I was working in radio as a DJ in Macon, Missouri. And the question I asked was, why is it, I asked the engineer, the chief engineer of the station, I asked him, why is it that the signal goes farther at night than during the day? And his response to me was, I don't have time to answer that right now. And I decided I wanted the answer for that. So I left my job, came back to Chicago, and went to DeVry and got the answers.
Okay.
And from there, the job evolved into what I'm doing now.
And that's interesting because a lot of people that I've come into contact with, they feel that it's kind of narrow. You come out with that perception, this is where I want to end up, and it's interesting to learn some of your background.
Mine is very similar because, as I mentioned before, I worked at Muhammad Speaks newspaper. It was as an illustrator or commercial artist, and I got exposed to television once when a film crew came and did a documentary on the Nation of Islam. At that time, the documentary was called The Nation of Common Sense. And I had a conversation with one of the camera people. I say, I like what you're doing. How can I get into that? Because I do still photography on the side. And he said, well, you got to go to a film school, and you got to get a little bit of technical background now because there's going to be a transition from film to videotape. So you should get some kind of technical background. I said, okay, I'll check it out. So I went to the Community Film Workshop. At that time, it was on North Clark Street, and now I believe they're on South Wabash. And I went there, and I dropped it because I didn't have enough time for it. So I wound up going to school for broadcast communications, thinking that when I get out, I was going to be a courtroom sketch artist. So in the meantime, while I was in school, I visited all the TV stations, and I talked to different people, and they said, oh, no, you would never be able to get a job doing this because pretty soon they're going to allow cameras inside the courtrooms, and they won't have any courtroom sketch artists. So I said, well, how can I do this? They said, well, another thing is very difficult because many of the people who are in broadcast now, their grandfathers and fathers were in radio, and they made that transition. So you got all these barriers and blockades that stopped me from getting in, which gave me the determination. And I said, I know I can do this. I know I can get it.
That much more.
So I wound up going to Columbia to take some production, and then I went to Illinois Institute of Technology to get the technical background, and wound up doing freelance television while I was in college. And then upon graduation of college, landed a job over at Channel 5. But before coming to Channel 5, as other persons mentioned before, you had to have some experience. They wanted you to have what you call like small town experience, which they considered Channel 44, WSNS TV, and plus the freelance stuff that I did. But the other barrier they gave me after I got that experience, they said, well, you need what's called a first phone. And I didn't know what a first phone was, you know. So he broke it down to me. He said, that's your first-class radio telephone license. And there was no place that I could learn it because I had finished school already. So I found out that there were courses that you can actually take to receive what's called a first class. So I received my first-class license, plus the experience that I had. Then they finally hired me. But now, as you probably know, it's against the law for them to say that you have to have a first-class radio telephone license to actually work in broadcast.
Okay.
That's a Can I just capitalize on that real quick? That's an interesting point that he brought out, and Fred and I were talking about it earlier. In this business, minorities have to deal with barriers on a daily basis, even today. Fred was telling me earlier, you know, about an incident that had happened to him back in the late 60s or early 70s, and I in turn told him, and I just found out, you know, what Mr. Muhammad just spoke about, but that's something that your viewing audience needs to be made aware of, that there are still barriers even today for minorities in this business to get into this business, and one of the reasons for that is because of the I'm losing my train of thought here.
Well, what kind of advice would you give to a minority student wanting to get into this business, wanting to be an ENG crew person? Maybe that would more focus your answer. Or your
did you want to handle that? Well, personally, I wouldn't advise. I don't like that term minority, because I don't believe that we're a minority. I don't see how we can be the minority if we're the majority of the people on earth, because we have to start thinking in global terms.
Okay,
so
well, in this country,
I think people of color, as far as media is concerned, we got to stop getting out of this mindset of getting a job in broadcast. We need to start pooling our resources and start buying television stations, getting licenses so that you can have your own. I mean, you know, these people who own Channel 44 and Channel 26, oftentimes those were business people who got together. But I mean, sitting right here on this stage is enough experience so that we can, if we were to own our own television station, that we can actually run the ENG department. So my advice to young people, especially people of color, is to start thinking in terms of pooling your resources and buying a small television station or a cable outfit and putting on your own shows and that type of thing, because, you know, college does not really prepare you for a job. College is a training ground. So we have to get more into the mindset, I believe, of owning our own TV and radio stations and newspapers so that we can get our message out there, so that we can control it and remove many of those barriers.
What do you feel about that, Fred?
You know, this industry is changing. It's changing from one that was centralized, that all the activity, all the information gathering and production was centralized from that television station. It's changing now to that they're bringing in a lot of external programming and news. I think that if I were wanting to get into this business now, I would be wanting to get into it from a freelance aspect. Perhaps create my own company, produce things and sell it to the television stations. I think that's for my way of thinking, I think that's the way to go about getting into it, because in terms of actually going to the companies, the NBCs, the CBSs, the television stations, their hiring is pretty much frozen. And in fact, its an effect on us as, for lack of a better term, minorities, is that the last hired, which are us, are the first fired.
I like that term that you use, people of color. When you think about incidents such as the Rodney King incident, where you had an amateur photographer to shoot the footage, and that was aired over countless number of television stations all over the country. When you and that's not the only type of incident, you know, it may be with police brutality that they have on footage, but with other incidents that amateur photographers shoot just because they happen to be there with the camera at that time. Do things like that, do you consider that as a threat, or would you feel that as being a threat to your position?
I don't feel it's a threat. It's just the actual facts. I mean, that's life. And like Freddie was saying earlier, they're looking to hire freelance or what's called per diem, because economically it's cheaper for a station. It's cheaper for a station to buy that amateur tape from you for $250, $500 and be through with you. But with a permanent employee, you're paying medical benefits and all these other type of benefits. So economically, it's the reality of life.
And the quality of personal equipment now is such that it's almost comparable to that's used for television.
Right.
When you're on a shoot, do you always have to have a reporter with you?
Oh no, and the majority of the times, you don't have a reporter with you. It depends on the situation. Ideally, it would be better to have a reporter, because the reporter's job is to ask questions. The photojournalist's job is to take the pictures and to make the story. But you need an individual who can actually ask questions, the who, what, when, where, and why. And that's difficult being a cameraman. If I'm coming to do a story and I got a camera on my shoulder and I'm trying to ask you a question, it can become very cumbersome. So the optimum situation would be to have a reporter.
So when you go on a shoot, okay, after you're given an assignment, do they give you specific details in what to shoot, or do they give you a general assignment and then you just go out and fill in the blanks, so to speak? I mean, how
that really depends on what the story is, I guess, because I mean, if you go into a situation, let's say if you go to a board meeting and they only want 2 or 3 of the people at the board meeting shot, then they'll tell you we want this person, and that person. Whereas if you're going to cover, just for instance, the other day, the Bulls rally, it's pretty much, you know, you're doing a feature story, and it's pretty much up to you, especially if you have control of the editing process also.
So what you're saying, news stories are shot differently from feature stories? Is this what I'm getting?
No, all of them are news stories. I'm saying, let's see, if I was to send, if a assignment manager was to send me to, let's say, the Cook County board meeting, and the news manager told me that they just wanted a shot of the president and a couple of the commissioners, they would give me those commissioners' names. I would take those shots, and then I'd be gone. I wouldn't. There's no need for me to shoot anything else because that's what they want. On a feature story that was something that I have a lot more control over, I can shoot pretty much what I want, when I want, and how I want to shoot it.
Okay. Well, what makes up a good shoot? Now, you're an editor.
What makes a good shoot is it has to start off with a good cameraman. I mean, Randall kind of simplified it even when he said shooting a board meeting. You can get two different camera people to go to do the same assignment, and you may not get everything that you want. The assignment manager may want, he'll tell you, well, we just want a VOSOT, voiceover with sound, meaning that you want what's called B-roll, some activity that's going on, and maybe if the president of the Cook County Board says something that you feel is controversial, you should roll on it. So the assignment manager is giving you the authority to have some journalistic decision-making without the reporter being there. And the cameraman, if he's a lazy cameraman, he may just come in what we call spray it. Just get a few shots, and it might be something going on that's real good, and he said, well, he just told me to come and spray it. But if you take an individual like Randall was saying, you'll sit there and you shoot something of the president of the Cook County Board saying something, he say, hey, I think they may need this back at the desk, and he'll continue to roll on it. But if you remember, originally he was just told to get VOSOT. So it depends on who the cameraman is and what their journalistic decision-making is at that particular time. It has a lot to do with time limitations, what's happening that day, and the camera person. So when you say a good shoot, it's such a general term. Every shoot is a good shoot depending on the camera. If you're a good camera person, your shot should be framed and focused, and the exposure should be correct from a technical standpoint. That's automatic. But from a journalistic standpoint, you have to make the decision whether or not you're going to stay there and roll any further than what they told you.
Say you're on an assignment, you're shooting footage. How much, in a time frame, how much of that footage from the time you shoot it ends up, after it's edited out, to what we see on TV? I mean, how much time involved is that? Come on, Fred.
Well, I was formerly out on the streets. I was out on the streets for 7.5 years as a cameraman. Now I'm indoors. I'm an editor, news editor. And you have to figure that the average story, if it's a VOSOT, voiceover, sound on tape type story, is 30 seconds long. A package, that is to say, where they have the reporter introducing or talking to people and giving his, relating the story to you as he sees it, with various people contributing, you know, by way of interviews and stuff, that's maybe 1:30. The whole shoot, however, may take 2 hours or more or less, depending.
Now, do you allow them to give some input as to what to keep on and what to take off, or is it just solely up to you and they don't have that type of
No, they pretty much script it out for you. They'll come in, sometimes you wind up doing things on your own, but for the most part they'll script things for you, and they'll have the thing there for you, and it's up to you to find the things and put them together. Sometimes the things they think they have they really don't have, and then you have to improvise. Or maybe a shot that they thought they had, they got the sound but they didn't get the video, or they got the video but the sound is somewhere else.
So
and you have to sort of put it all together and figure out ways around those problems.
There are ways you can have control, especially being a black cameraman. I was given an assignment once to shoot some B-roll of a welfare office, and they said, we want you to go on the south side and do such and such and such and such. And I said, well, I'll get you some welfare footage. And I said, I think I know an even better place where you can get more people if that's what you want. So I wound up in the uptown area. And when I brought the tape back, they said, this is not what we wanted. And I said, you wanted, you know, people in the welfare lines and that kind of thing. They said, well, no, we were looking for, you know, more of the minority perspective. And I said, well, you know, you told me South Side, and naturally there was a disagreement. The perception is that people on welfare are, quote, minorities. And
people of color.
People of color. My message was that, you know, and we don't often get a chance to express this being camera people, is that the majority of people on welfare are not black folks. But our news director couldn't understand that, so we wound up getting somebody else to go out and shoot that same story and showing black folks in the welfare office, which continues the stereotype that black folks or minorities or people of color are on welfare. So you get into those type of dichotomies on your job.
That's one of the most important parts of the job, too, having that sort of control and being conscious enough to stop something like that. It's happened plenty of times where I've gotten scripts. I've been out with a reporter on an all-day shoot, and the script will come back, and the script is just has been demeaning to a black person within the script or within that story, and I just refuse to edit. I said, look, unless you change this, I'm not going to have anything to do with it.
That was, go ahead, Brandon.
You've touched on a real sore subject with me, because this is something that I've been battling for years and years. I guess you could call me an advocate for equal treatment. But I go back a few years in television. I'm not one of the old timers, but I've been around a little bit.
16mm was around.
And I always noticed that there was a very limited amount of people of color behind cameras and in editing booths. The result of it was that the perception that the public gets is the perception that that cameraman or editor chose to give them of the particular subject. I felt it was very important that we get people with a different outlook on life, a different viewpoint, like Dwayne just mentioned, when he went to a different welfare office and that which they wanted, because they wanted to perpetuate the stereotype. This may not be intentionally done, maybe it's subconscious, but the fact is it is being done. It does happen, and we do have a certain amount of editorial input in terms of what we show as camera people or what we edit in or out as editors. And I think it's very important that people recognize that this business needs a fresh and new, a different viewpoint at times. As for example, one time, similar to what Dwayne related, I went out to shoot weather. Weather generally means going out to the lakefront, setting the camera on a tripod and shooting a beautiful lake view. I felt, and my partner, who is black, African American, we felt that there were other weather shots which were equally beautiful, and went to an inner city block and shot kids playing softball in an empty lot with rocks and things thrown about. They would not air it. But it was life, it was fact, it was reality for some of us who never get a chance to go to the lake or get a chance to go to the Art Institute or wherever. We may not even be aware that it exists.
Well, let me ask you this question. Are assignment editors sensitive to what E&G crew, or what reporters for that matter, they send on different shoots? Give an example. Would they send someone like Dwayne or yourself to Bridgeport to cover a meeting, a town meeting on racial tensions? Would they do that? Or, as you were stating about what you shoot, do they? I mean, do they have that type of sensitivity?
Go ahead.
They can suggest. They can ask. I mean, you have to understand that we're people. We're not like animals as cameramen. So they can't say, you go to Bridgeport and you cover this story. They can ask me to go cover a controversial story, a race-related story in Bridgeport, and I can respond with a yes or no. And then if however I respond, I'll explain my answer to them. But it's never a thing where you're demanded to go cover a certain situation. And most of the time, the assignment manager, depending on what type of day it is, or what time of day it is, the assignment manager is not sensitive to your feelings, whether or not he should send a black or white person into Bridgeport to cover a story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because see, we're covering general news, so we're in Skokie, we're in Schaumburg, Naperville, 63rd and Cottage Grove, so it's a unique position that we're in because we're in places that we wouldn't normally be in. I mean, you're at City Hall, you're in the chambers, you're in the mayor's office, you're in Cabrini Green up on the 17th floor. When you say sensitivity, you can't be sensitive to that which you have no knowledge of. Oftentimes a news director or an assignment editor just don't know. They haven't been exposed to other cultures. I can't help but think of the assignment editor that we have now. He's a very compassionate individual. He'll talk to you on a one-on-one, but the racism that's practiced is, Freddie mentioned earlier, it may be unintentional. I'll call it out of ignorance, and oftentimes you just have to, pull them to the side and explain to them, this is the way it really is, and this is not going to work. But sometimes, you may feel intimidated to even bring that up to them. It depends on the individual. It depends on the camera person. There are some white camera people who will not go in Cabrini Green. There are some white camera people at my place of employment, if they go into Cabrini Green, they want a bodyguard. And I have no problem going in Cabrini Green, but it depends on the individual.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you do have a right to say, well, if the assignment editor gives you an assignment, to refuse or accept it without any serious repercussions.
Well, there can be repercussions.
Have you experienced things like that? Have any of
Well, let me give you an example of what the repercussions can be. It can be that, well, you refuse to go on a store. You can refuse to go on a store because you feel your life may be in danger. I mean, that's primarily why you would refuse to do a story. When the white camera people that I know refuse to go into Cabrini Green, they say, well, they feel their lives are in danger, so they don't want to deal with Cabrini Green. Why don't you guys send somebody like Muhammad or one of those guys over there to do it? They can deal with that. The repercussion could be that, you're a troublemaker, and what we'll do is let's put you in a department where you can just sit in a location for 8 hours. We don't have to worry about whether or not you're going to decide whether or not you're going to do this particular story. It's an unsaid thing. As a matter of fact, I was threatened personally by my managers for not doing overtime. This was recently. When I say threatened, let me give you an example of what I mean. I was called in the office, and the director of my department said, we got the word that you keep refusing to do overtime. See, overtime is like automatic in this business. Even though you're scheduled for 9 to 5, if you're in the middle of an interview and it's 5 o'clock, you can't say, oh, I'm off the clock, I got to leave. You just can't do that. And we understand that. The problem was that I have a life outside of NBC. And oftentimes they'll ask me, can I stay beyond my out time? And I'll say, well, no, I have other things to do. And when you do this continually, word will get back to your news director that this individual refuses to do overtime. So when I was called in the office, they said that, well, if you can't do the overtime, we'll have to put you back up in editing. And editing generally is a 40-hour-a-week position. So naturally, I retorted. I said, you mean in order to get the situation right, you have to threaten me to put me in another department? So I was very adamant about it. I said, well, I want to see your superior, because I don't think I should be called in the office for not doing overtime. And I explained to him, like I mentioned earlier, is that I have another life outside of that. So you have to deal with those type of things. And there was 2 ways that could have been handled. I could have been very irate and emotional about it, but I said, you can put me in editing, or you can put me in minicam, whatever department you think that you feel that I can best serve the company. I wasn't going to get an altercation about whether or not I wanted to work overtime or not.
Have you ever experienced any serious repercussions for refusing an assignment?
No, and I can't really think of a time that I have refused an assignment. I've refused to shoot certain things, whether I'm out in the field shooting, and a reporter will see something and say, hey, shoot this because later on I want to do this, and I know
you're
that,
already on a shoot.
Right, exactly, exactly,
Okay.
and
Has there ever been an instance where, when footage was shot and ended up on the editing board, something was omitted, something that could have given a better perception of the story that wasn't put in, and you feel like, well, man, you know, people really missed out for not having that? And have you had problems like that before, Fred?
I've had occasion. In fact, I can't recall specifically, but I edited a piece that Dwayne shot.
Oh, man.
And I felt that the news person was not interpreting what was happening as it really was. As a minority person, you have to expect, you have certain sensitivity, certain heightened awareness about things. You have to, as we all know. With that in mind, I can relate to what the cameraman was shooting and showing. And what my writer was seeing was not in fact what I was seeing and hearing, nor what my cameraman was seeing and hearing. And I had to take it on myself to take issue with this writer and bring it up to a higher authority and present my viewpoint, and the result was that the story was changed to reflect the thought that I felt the cameraman and I had both seen.
Okay. It seems to me that when you're talking to your bosses, when you have different problems, are they usually, well, okay, except in your instance, but can you usually just, you know, get to the bottom of it and work it out?
Well, people are very accessible. I mean, these are media people. I mean, they're used to argument and discussion. I mean, that's no problem. But the final analysis is they have the last word. I mean, it's their store, and they can run it however they like to run it. You know, and basically, you work for them, but you do have principles that you still can hold on to, and you can still fight for those principles. But the bottom line is their store, and they do what they want to do with it because it's their product, and their thing is to get the numbers, to get the viewers.
Which is another reason for bringing up what I had said earlier when you indicated what would it be like, or what would you suggest to someone wanting to get into the business, which is all the more reason, I feel, for us to develop our own companies and sell our product.
Absolutely.
That way we give it our viewpoint and our outlook. Let's face it, the majority of the people that that follow the news, for the most part, don't follow it by reading the newspapers. They follow it, they get their news, they get their opinions from radio and television. And we are the people who are giving them those opinions. Right. If you think about it, we're the ones that if we get sent to a welfare office, have the option of showing them a Hispanic person, a black person, or a Caucasian person. We're the ones that when we're editing the piece get to select which person gets shown. Do we show somebody that's looking shabby, undignified, or whatever? Or do we show them a person who carries himself well and looks dignified, whether or not they're poor or whatever? So therefore, it goes back to what I was trying to say, that we should have an input, and I think the way to get into it again is by developing our own companies to mold the image that people have of whatever. Because up to now, the images that we have, or stereotypes, if you will, are things that have been perpetuated on us because our minds are being molded by radio and television. And I think we should change those and do what we can to change that. And one way to do that would be by having our own companies and our own production services.
Absolutely.
Well, what type of stories do you like to cover? I can start with you, Randall.
To be perfectly honest with you, I love covering stories in the black community. I love doing it because I know my people better than anyone at the station does. You know, as far as entering the community, whether the story be a death in the family or a jubilant story, I wouldn't have any problem doing that on a daily basis if I could. And if I go through a whole week without doing one story in the black community, I can definitely feel it at the end of that week. So I wouldn't mind, you know, just covering every story I do in the black community.
What was one of your most interesting stories?
One of my most interesting was definitely the release of Nelson Mandela in South Africa.
Well, let's talk about that, about your trip to Africa. I know we have some footage of it, and as the footage runs, we want you to give us some insight on, you know, what's going on and what we're looking at.
Well, actually, this piece that the piece of footage that I supplied to you was an excerpt from a piece called, a half-hour show called Winds of Change that John Davis and I put together after we returned from South Africa. And the views that you're going to see on this piece are a script, if you will, not a script, a journal that I was keeping on a daily basis based on what I saw daily in South Africa. And what you're about to see happen roughly a half hour to 45 minutes after our arrival the first day in South Africa.
How was the trip to Africa initiated? I know it was, of course, it was funded by where you worked your station, but how was it brought up? Did you go to the assignment editor and they said, well, we want you to go to South Africa?
Oh, no. Exactly what happened was that, of course, you know, it had been rumored that Nelson Mandela would be released from prison, and station managers confirmed that rumor and to be a fact. And at that point, they knew that they were going to send John Davis. When I say they, I'm speaking of Jonathan Rogers, who was then the general manager of the station, who was African-American. He knew that he wanted to send John Davis to cover this story, and he wanted me to shoot the story. So he came to me and asked me would I shoot the story, and we just agreed on that, and that's the way it went.
Okay. How was your experience?
How was it? I came back, I guess you can say, emotionally torn, because I had so many mixed emotions after I got back. It was definitely a learning experience, and I would encourage any African American or people of color to go to their native countries to, you know, to see actually what's going on there today, and to be conscious of their history.
Well, we have the footage queued up now, and just as you could just give a brief description of what we're looking at when it comes on the screen. Well, you can go on and start talking.
Well, like I said, this is what you're about to see happen.
To cameraman Randall Blakey, the violence he saw numbed his senses, yet he kept his camera rolling. But when he put down the camera, he picked up a pen and wrote down his thoughts in his diary on South Africa. Here are a few of his thoughts.
On the way back to the Bureau, we stopped by St. Mary's Church, and a group of ANC supporters were leaving church in celebration of the unbanning. They were chanting, dancing, and very, very, very peaceful. Just as I started to capture this event in history, 4 cops from SAP, South African Police, sound off on a bullhorn and say,
"Attention! Attention! This gathering is prohibited under the National Security Act. You are now ordered to disperse, and you must depart from this place of gathering immediately. I gave you 2 minutes."
I was like, what forever for? These people are leaving church. However, the ANC supporters started to move on, still peaceful and still chanting. Before we knew it, SAP moved in riot form, hitting supporters in the heads with the butts of shotguns, beating supporters with clubs, causing some to be crushed by buses and cars. I'm talking about grandfathers, grandmothers, teens, preteens, babies, and young adults were being treated like a herd of cattle by these young, white South African cops.
What happened today was a disaster. After these people have gone into the stage, there was a disaster. People have been crushed by cars across the road. There was no violence, nothing whatsoever.
This was my first glimpse of the 60s in Chicago, Alabama, and Georgia. It was the worst, the absolute worst treatment of people I'd ever seen. While everything was happening, I was trying to shoot, think, be angry, control anger, make sure John and I stayed together, and deal with seeing my people treated like mere animals, dogs, wild dogs. As we started to walk away, I couldn't even get full sentences to form from my mouth, so I just remained silent, with a million thoughts running rampant through my brain. But the most prevalent was seeing my people so powerful in song and dance, but yet so powerless to teenage whites who've been dubbed authority in charge by local government. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but me.
His was an experience in personal pain and perseverance. It has been written that it is perseverance that is more prevailing than violence.
Now that you've had a chance to come back at it and think more about your trip, what are your thoughts now? Not to say that they would be different, but probably more elaborated on.
Well, it definitely made me aware of the work that I have to do, the responsibility that I have to educate those who do not know what's going on in South Africa. And that's what I've been doing ever since I got back. It has made me aware of the role that I should play in society as far as a black photojournalist is concerned, and teaching my people what types of things go on in South Africa, and relate them to the things that are happening here in the United States, so that we may become a better people.
Were you scared?
Oh, of course I was
Did you fear
scared.
that maybe someone would come up and hit you? Have you ever been in situations where you felt your life was threatened? You were running the camera. Well, I'm here to run the camera, and because of an irate crowd person or a police person come up to you and just threaten you, make you feel very defensive. Have you been in a situation like that? Well, I know you have. But Fred, or
I think we all have. I think it's almost like it goes horse and carriage. You know, I mean,
how do you
it
handle
goes
that?
with the territory.
How do you handle that?
Well, my situation is a little different. I've never felt my life was really threatened pointing the camera at any particular thing. I've had instances when I pointed the camera at someone and they said they didn't want their picture taken, and automatically I would just stop. But as far as the closest that I can remember of a recent incident of life being in danger, but I didn't even get out the car, was the night that the Bulls won, and we were over near Chicago Stadium and they were celebrating. I drove up on the scene and it was pandemonium, and I called back at the desk on the radio and said, I don't think it would be advisable for me to get out the car and turn this camera on, you know, because you have a mob of people here. So oftentimes you'll see a situation and you can back off from it. But one feeling that you get, I always call it the invisible man, because when I'm on that camera, oftentimes the people don't really see the camera person. I mean, you can do an interview with Harold Washington when he was mayor, Daley, Bush, Reagan, and all these people, and they don't really see the camera person. You know, you see the reporter and they know that somebody's behind it, because there are many times that I saw these individuals away from NBC. And I would have to tell them I was the guy that was with, you know, that reporter, and and you can tell that they don't really know who you are, you know, they're shaking your hand. So I got this thing called the invisible man syndrome, is that oftentimes the people don't really see you behind them, but that's not to say that your life wouldn't be in any danger.
I've been assaulted by the public and by the police. I've been threatened, I've been called names. I had so many incidents. I've had them happen in Bridgeport. I've had them happen on the north side. They happen all over. Two incidents that stick in my mind. One was kind of funny. The more serious incident, the one that I really felt offended by, was we went up to the north side someplace to do a story on a gas explosion. While I was there, my partner, who was African American, and I were talking between ourselves about what was going on, whereupon one of Chicago's finest approached us and told us that that's not the way to act in this part of town. Then he requested that we leave. Another incident, when this one was funny, was, again, the same partner and we were down at Bridgeport, the church where Mayor Daley used to attend, the original Mayor Daley. And we got sent out there to do some stuff. I don't know what the story was, but the bottom line of this whole thing was that two young white thugs approached us and requested our departure. We left. Another incident, we were on the southwest side. Apparently there was a burglary ring going on, and the burglary ring was being led by white daughter of a prominent businessman in the area. The result of my African-American partner's presence there was that the camera was shoved in my face and we were thrown out physically.
Thrown out the club. You hit upon it, but I want you all to elaborate on it a bit as far as your responsibility. What are, both technically and morally, do you feel your responsibilities being an E&G crew person?
Well, technically, that's an easy one. Technically, it's to get the picture. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, that your shot should be in focus. It should be framed. It should have composition, and the lighting and exposure should be correct. The moral obligation that you have is to really to report the truth. That's my own personal feeling about it. If you go out and do a story, as Randall mentioned earlier, you can't help but have a kinship for your own community. So when you go out, especially into your own community to show a story, the moral obligation is to show the truth. And the problem with that is that you would hope that the people back at the shop have the same moral obligation that you have to make sure that the truth is exhibited through what you have shot on the street. That's where the problem comes in, that your moral obligation may end with you, but it may be aborted somewhere else along the line.
What do you feel are your responsibilities, Fred?
I pretty much feel the same as Dwayne. As an editor, which is I'm working now, my obligation is to show the truth. I try to see the story as the cameraman is seeing it. I feel that if I can do that, I'm doing the story justice. If I see something's wrong with it, as in that previous story where I felt the interpretation, the slant being given the story wasn't what it really was, then my moral obligation bids me that I go above the person who is writing this thing and get it set straight, or at least attempt it.
But you know, I don't want to sound like this is a whole down thing and it's all a moral issue, because we do some fun stories too. I mean, you know, the Bull celebration, you know, that was upbeat. I mean, there are things, you know, parades are always fun to do. I mean, you know.
We have some footage of your, you covered for the Bulls for the championships. Yeah, we do. We're gonna get it queued up. But before we go into it, what footage are we going to see? Yeah,
this. Warner Saunders did a half-hour special on Jerry Krause, who is the general manager of the Chicago Bulls, and he is one of the most hated men in Chicago because the fans generally don't like his pick of players. And we did a behind-the-scenes thing with Jerry Krause going to his office, interviewing him. We also did some things with the Bulls players themselves, where I isolated certain players during games. So they had to send me to a bunch of games where I isolated on players. It was narrated by Warner Saunders, shot by myself, and I think the producer on this was a woman by the name of Mary Hines.
Okay, we're going to look at that now.
Cheered extra loud this year for our winning Chicago Bulls. Michael Jordan. Great. Scottie Pippen. Second best. But there's one man that doesn't seem to share in the cheers and the praise. Jerry Krause.
No comment.
Probably the worst. And he's the focus of our attention in this next half hour. I'm talking about General Manager Jerry Krause.
In some ways, because I've seen you in action, it's almost like you play off of the negativity.
Well, I know certain things. I mean, I know I'm never going to be what they call pretty. I mean, I know that I'm not 6'3", and I'm not skinny, and I'm not, you know, overly handsome, as long as, you know, a couple people, roly-poly, and cute. But if I can, and I've always had a kind of a thing about that. I've never been one of the clique. I've never been in the quote clique or quote group. I never wanted to be. I was taught at a very young age as a scout, stay by yourself. Get off by yourself and work by yourself, and you'll work better. Don't listen to other people's thoughts. Freddie Hasselman, may God rest his soul. Great man. Great Yankee scout for many, many years, great White Sox scout for many years. Was like a father to me in a lot of ways. And Freddie used to say, hey, use your own mind. Don't worry about anybody else's. And so I've never been in, quote-unquote, the clique. Well, I think that's helped me particularly in this job, because I'm not in the NBA clique, but I can deal with everybody who's in the clique. And I've made deals with many, or we've made deals here with many, many different teams since we've been here. And part of that is because people know, for one thing, when they talk to me about a trade, they know it's not going to get in the newspapers. They know that their players are not going to be mentioned in public, because I'm not going to the media and say, hey, we're dealing with so-and-so. That doesn't happen around here. They also know that we try to do things in a quiet, peaceful kind of way. We don't get involved with a lot of, we check and do our homework. We do it quietly. I thought it was a great tribute. Early in this season, one of my competitors came in and he said, you know, he said, that damn stack and that games. He said, I don't know about those two. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, they come in, he said, they say hello and they say goodbye, and they don't say anything in between. You got them trained to it. They're getting like you now.
Yeah, so you got disciples in that. So you're saying you're not in the Old Boys Network, but you got access to the Old Boys Network.
Yeah, and you've got to. You've got to be able to deal with people in this business. And yeah, you say I feed off of it. I'll feed off of certain parts, but yeah, some of it I will.
No, but I mean, I see it. You got your game face on. It's going to happen. I mean, Krause comes in, the game face is on. You look like the meanest man in the world. That's...
Well, I think part of that is that during a game, I don't want to show emotion. There are times when, you know, that my wife sits next to me, a bomb can go off. I don't show emotion because I can't. There are people around me. There are people in front of me, and people look at me. And I can't show emotion about our players. And sometimes, and most of the time when I sit there, I'm sitting with the scouting report in my hands. So I know what we're supposed to be doing at a given moment. I know what the opposition, what play they're going to run. I know what defense they're going to do. I know all the different things because I read the report very thoroughly for the game. And I'm sitting there with it in my hand. And I know when we screw up. And I can't jump up and down, or I can't express things. So I try to be, and that's tough to do. And you're out in the public. And people look at you, and you know, and sometimes I'll say, so-and-so, you know, I might be talking about a player or something, or I might be thinking in my mind, hey, he just screwed up the third time in a row now, and I just got to sit there. And sometimes you sweat. I mean, you just literally sweat.
You're not getting as much as you used to, at least from my own observations. The fans are still on your case. I mean, I can see you walk by, and you get it from them. Your head never moves. I mean, you just kind of walk straight, do you?
I don't hear it. It's when a game starts, I don't hear a thing. I can concentrate. God gave me, if God gave me one thing, he gave me the ability to totally concentrate on an object. And during a game, I don't hear anything, I don't see anything. People have said they talk to me during games, or they'll walk by me and say hello. I don't even see them. I mean, I get so totally, you know, and I've had owners come up to me, part of our ownership come up to me and say, well, I talked to you the other day during the game. You did? I didn't know.
Yeah.
Because I can get so totally one track. And when you're scouting, if you travel 5,000 miles or 4,000 miles or whatever to see a game, and you go all night, and it's a long night, and you're tired as hell, and you got to walk in that building. You can't worry about the trip. You got 2 hours to do your job, and you can't let anything affect you. You have to have tunnel vision. You got to put the game in front of it and block out everything.
While we were, the viewers were watching the clip, Fred Talavera brought up a very interesting point. I wanted you to restate what you said about the clip that we just saw.
Jerry Krause was mentioning something about not being a member of the good old boy system. And that is the problem that we all face right now, which is leads to the, you had mentioned the issue of when Nelson Mandela was freed.
Right. There were hundreds of cable stations that covered it, but not one was black-owned. And I also wanted your feelings on that. You know, we can kind of tie the two questions in together.
Yeah, they are interrelated because we are not in the Old Boy Network. And the Old Boy Network feels threatened by our presence. I mean, anytime you're in control and you have the power, power is not going to concede easily. So therefore, when you have creative-minded people and you have a power out there that is threatening your power, then naturally it's a power. I think earlier you asked the question, do we feel threatened by the amateur video? You know, we don't have the power to feel threatened. It's not in our hands. But the old boy network, who has the power, are threatened because they know that if those persons, minorities, come into power, that we threaten their very network. I mean, that's why the networks are threatened now by cable and VCRs and satellite. That's the threat right there within that old boy network. But as far as blacks and Hispanics owning cable and television, it's just not happening. But until we pool our resources and develop the talents that we have and own cable television stations and broadcast television stations, we're going to continue to complain about how we're not being shown in the media in the proper light. We have to own those mediums in order to get our story told correctly. And until then, it'll be cyclical. You know, we'll come forward and we'll talk about it, and we'll disappear for a while, and somebody else will come forward and express it, and it'll just be business as usual because the old boy network has not been touched.
See, and it comes to the old boy network as opposed to the new boy network. We bring a more heightened sense of awareness, a sensitivity which is lacking simply because it has been the old boy network.
Okay, you had a statement that you wanted to bring forward. You had lost your thought earlier, but then you regained it, have you?
Oh no, I was just making a point that Mr. Muhammad just brought out. We're automatically looked upon as a threat when we come into the workplace looking for employment. So I can't remember how I stated it earlier, but I remember the barriers that he had spoke about that people of color have to deal with when they go to look for employment. The reason for those barriers are because we're looked upon as threats to the good old boy network.
Well, very briefly, my last question is, if there was something about the medium that you work in that you could change, what would it be?
Oh, that's an easy question.
I want everyone to comment.
There used to be a show that came on years ago called BVON. It's called The Black's View of the News. It's like Freddie was saying earlier, you need more people of our perspective in the business to make a change. You know, we got to stop getting Lincoln Park's view of it, downtown view of it. You got to get a potpourri of views, and until you get all people involved in it, it's going to be a continuum of this oppression of ideas.
What do you feel about that, Fred?
I think we need more people of color in decision-making positions, and I think it's imperative that those people that do get those positions remember who they are, where they came from. Because unfortunately, lots of times we get up there and we forget who we are.
I want to thank you all for coming to the program. Of course, we just scratched the surface of this issue. I want to thank you, Blake, Fred, and Dwayne. As we come to the end of another show, it's time for us to encourage each of you to read a book. The book that we recommend this time is called Black Voices. This book is rich in African American literature. Reading is very good for you.